There's protocols as far as what you're doing. Questing is kind of it's an active state. It's an active process. I mean, you could just lay there and kind of survive for 4 days and just get through it, which, you would probably still have a lot of benefit from, but honestly, you would miss the point. So the quest is a process of searching and seeking and asking and questing. It's like you're asking for something. You are seeking. And that might be through formal questions you have in your mind. It might just be through an open heart, and a state of longing to know the big questions in your life. Why are you here? What is your purpose? What's your gifting? What is your direction? Sometimes quests are used when you have to make significant choices or changes in your life.
Yeah! What's up, everybody? Your life alchemist, your dragon. Welcome to Alchemized Life. I'm your host, Justin David Carl. This is a show where I seek out and share expertise, wisdom, and thought leadership in all domains with the mission of empowering and inspiring you to proactively design and truly live a life worth living. We're all in this together, and when we do the work together, we go so much farther, so much faster, and have so much more fun. Without further ado, let's dig into this episode and alchemize life. Ben Sanford, so good to have you on the show, brother. Thank you for joining me today.
Really good to see you, man. Thanks for having me.
Of course. I'm going to share, kind of just to open this up, how I first encountered you in my youth. I was really into martial arts and I was taking Taekwondo. And one day, and I'll never forget, you and your friend Charlie came in to class to either join, or maybe you joined another day when I wasn't there practicing, and you literally looked like Tarzan, like straight out of the fucking movie, like jacked, long hair. Both of you looked like bodybuilders, and I was like, oh my God, who are these people? They're like, like what I wanted to look like when I got a little bit older, because I think I was probably like 12 or 13. So I'll never forget when I first saw you, because I was like, this is like the guy that I see in the Muscle and Fitness magazines.
That's awesome.
So that's how I originally remember meeting you. To give the audience kind of a sense of who you are today, you're the founder of Tribal Edge. You're a nature educator, as well as a primal arts educator. And to, really dive into that a little bit deeper, can you share with me and the audience what Tribal Edge is?
Sure. So it's interesting. It's a great question because it's currently in a real state of evolution, but I'm going to just kind of give the nutshell version here. So Tribal Edge is a few things. It's a training center for what I call the Primal Arts. And Primal Arts are basically the skills and the tools and the practices that human beings have been using since our beginning, since the origin. And so the word primal actually means essential and core and original. A lot of people think of it as kind of like just meaning primitive, but it's actually, if you think of like prime, so the primal arts are the things that we've always needed. Some examples would be the skills of survival, basically, right? So we have the need for shelter, water, fire, and food, these basics. So I've kind of taken these different elements that I've studied in my life and kind of organized them into a framework that helps people make contact with these original skills and tools, and then in the process of training, encounter themselves. And so basically there's a whole nother layer of personal development that occurs on any path of training. And in that process as well, there's also a community that forms around the work. So it has these different layers, these different dimensions. And so that's my attempt to kind of create a holistic curriculum as well. So it has multiple layers of depth, but also different perspectives of focus. So essentially the primal arts we focus on, just to briefly cover that, would be tracking and awareness, which are kind of one category. And so those are the arts of perception and interpretation and communication, and actually a whole huge field, obviously, and also nature connection and observation, tracking. And then we have the needs of survival, which are, as I mentioned, shelter, water, fire, and food, and then the tools that we made that we make to accomplish those things. And then there's the category of healing or the healer, and this encompasses everything from self-care and wellness and fitness to healing with others, or it can be hands-on healing. It could be just communication. It could be restoring relationships, and then and that also includes a big area we refer to as caretaking, which is basically being a steward of the planet. And then finally, the area of combat or conflict, which is where we train in martial arts. Also, fitness is in there as well, but also just kind of resilience training, ability to understand conflict and be a protector. And I think that's a kind of a central theme as well. So those are like those four categories are based off of 4 archetypes that I was inspired, that one of my teachers inspired me to look at as kind of a framework for study. And I just took off with that and built eventually. First, I just started with, I don't know if you want to get into the whole story, but just kind of give you what Tribal Edge is. Started as just a training group, kind of like a club. And then I got a little more clear on direction and vision there, and developed more programs and better curriculum, and a team kind of formed around that, and eventually a community. And so it's just one way to kind of capture, like my catchphrase basically is that it's training for everyday heroes, people that just want to, make the world a little better and have people feel a little safer when they're around, and people that can effectively handle challenging situations. So that's, the stuff life throws at us.
What were those 4 archetypes that you kind of based your curriculum and, this?
Yeah. So they were the perceiver. So you think of that as like the tracker, the awareness piece, right? So basically, and I don't know if these are like true Jungian archetypes, but they're valuable lenses. So the perceiver, the provider, which is the survival realm, the preserver, which is healing realm, and the protector, which is conflict resolution realm. So
yeah, let's talk a little bit about tracking. Actually, before we talk about tracking, I want to go like way back, because and I think this may connect to tracking, is like, how did you actually get around to, first like developing this, kind of Tribal Edge club that developed into programs, that developed into like a team of people, which developed into a community? Like, how did you actually, like, what is the origin story, or almost your entrepreneurial story of getting to Tribal Edge?
Cool. I appreciate that, because I do want to honor where I got this stuff from. So for me, it's interesting. I was a kind of a feral kid, grew up in the same town as you did, and the beautiful wild Olympic Peninsula. And it was one of those, for me, it was, I don't know. I don't know how, I can't really say what inspired me at the very beginning, but like for me, at like 8 years old, I took off my shoes, like intentionally. It was like, shoes are dumb. What is this shoe thing? And it was almost like something whispered in my ear, like, take off your shoes, buddy. And I've resisted shoes since then. I'm definitely a barefooter. I wear flip-flops at the most. And I wear boots in my tree care business. But so from a really young age, I was kind of inspired by the primal. And it's funny, I think that small gesture, just that contact with the earth, with bare feet. I was just thinking about this yesterday. There's so much information conveyed through your feet at all times when you're connected to the earth, So I think that was not a small thing. I was also just kind of a quiet, a very shy kid, actually, and was comfortable in the woods by myself and with a few friends. And it wasn't just a joy of being in the woods. I felt like I was getting something from it too, like it was feeding me in some way, and kind of early sensed some sort of teaching quality, healing quality, something going on. So anyway, when I was fast forward to about 14, I was given the book by a family friend called The Tracker. And also in that same year, I found the book Tarzan. And I think we've talked about this before, how those two books kind of mentored me at that impressionable age and really gave me like this imaginal self to move towards, kind of like you were talking about when you first met me, like having lists like these inspired stories. So the tracker is about a story about my teacher, actually, Tom Brown Jr., and as well as his teacher, a man named Stalking Wolf, who was Southern Lippin Apache, an elder. And so briefly, Tom learned the ways of tracking and all the stuff that I wanted to learn about connecting with nature and kind of these deep magical ways of understanding how to live with the earth and disappear forever if you wanted to, just walk out naked into the woods. And that story inspired me like crazy. So I was testing myself and I was building shelters and I was trying to figure out tracking and doing all through the book, and same time, as I said, Tarzan had inspired me and I was like totally obsessed with that. So that's when I got into fitness and working out, and I was already tree climbing, but got into it really, really crazy. And the barefoot thing kind of fit that, so anyway, it kind of like formed a lot of my identity around those mentors. And then that was really strong. I'd go to school and then I was like just quiet and like invisible at school. And then I'd come home and I'd take off my shirt and grab my knives and my pole vaulting pole and my spear and stuff and run out in the woods until, and that was every day. So anyway, one day in my late, like I was 19 or something or 20, I look at reading one of Tom Brown's books. And I'm like, wait, in the back, he talks about he has a school. So I contacted the school and I'm like, this was back before internet and all that stuff, right? So I'm just like, you have to like actually mail them a letter or like dial them on the phone and talk to them, and finally made the connection. And I got to the school. I was about 22, I think, 22 or 23 when I went to my first class with Tom. And turns out he teaches classes on pretty much every other week basis, or used to. And he had this amazing curriculum and deeply embodied experiential learning process. And it was like a million times greater than what I'd been reading in the book. So I had this huge like going home experience when I met kind of this tribe of people who were doing this. And so there was a point when I was younger, though, I forgot to mention, where I was inspired to have some sort of a training center. Didn't know what that meant. I just knew I wanted to do some sort of work with people at first I thought it was gonna be like adventure based, because I was a kid, I guess. And like traveling around the world and doing like climbing tree climbing adventures and stuff like that. But I think that was really the seed planted for Tribal Edge. And so I had this calling from a really young age. I'd say 14 actually was when it started, but then 17, it became real clear. Actually had a really cool experience with that. Should I share that story real quick? So this is how I felt like the first clarification for Tribal Edge. I would say the vision of it came to me when I was 17. I was doing some landscaping work with a friend of mine. Might have been 19, but right in there. And one of the guys that worked with him was a native Lakota Sioux Native American, and he was like son or grandson of holy man, and he was pretty intact with his culture, and he was older than me. He was probably 50. His name was Tony Ghosthawk, and cool guy. I was following him around, and I didn't realize that he was totally mentoring me, and I had no clue because he was good at it, and he was kind of a coyote about it. And so we one day we were driving back from Port Townsend, and he kind of just like out of the blue driving along, and he just looks at me kind of like with a stare and goes, "So what's your vision?" And we hadn't talked in those terms yet, and I had this feeling of release inside of me. It's like right from my chest and into my center. I'm just like, woo, this like embodied moment. And I just kind of spoke about, this play training center or some sort of a community where people are like learning cool stuff. And they're like, we're learning together and we're in the woods and we're in nature, and it's like changing people's lives. And it has to do with, the Tom Brown stuff I've been doing. Basically, these pieces all started to form for me in a way that I hadn't felt before. And I really did get a visual vision as well. And the release is what I remember of like rightness, first time. And he's like, huh, cool. So the cool part of that story to me, though, is we happened to be driving by my property in Blinn, where our training center is. We were driving across the creek right when he asked me that, and right when I had that release. So there's some sort of spatial magic that was going on there too, I feel like. So, so that was the first time I made contact with that vision. And then, so then I went to tracker school, as I mentioned. I did a bunch of training with Tom. That went on for years. In fact, I still go there. And in 2002, after some preparation and, real thinking about this, I started a fire at my land, which was our first gathering, and just made it an open gathering. And it was small. It was like my family and a couple other people. And I made a commitment to do that every weekend for a year. And I know I missed a couple because I was traveling, but other than that, I did it every weekend, and people could come if they want. And we would practice some skills or talk about cool stuff or play in the woods, but it was just kind of this informal gathering for a while. And then the year after that year, I actually started teaching some classes with kind of introductory stuff that felt appropriate. I felt like I had competence in, and it took off from there. So that was my backstory. And it took off slow. It wasn't like a immediate fire, but it was a slow burning, slow cooked.
Yeah. And to weave myself into the story, I'm trying to think of when I've known you like since I was a kid, and my younger brother, I think he was a part of your kind of like first, like set of students. And, Quincy and Braden also like friends of mine. And through whatever circumstances, Braden and I reconnected, and his kind of strongest message to me in this reconnection, I think this was around, I want to say 2015-ish, 2016, somewhere around there. Mm-hmm. He was like, you need to do a vision quest with Ben Sanford. And I was like, what's a vision quest? And so I started researching that. And now in this day and age, I often get asked what are some of the most transformational things that you've ever done? And always at the top of the list is a vision quest. So, and I always have to state this isn't one of those crazy ayahuasca trips where I'm on a bunch of drugs and stuff. This is something else. So could you explain to the audience, your lineage of a vision quest, what it entails, and kind of, what the structure of it is, as well as, what are kind of some of the things that can come out of it?
Sure. Yeah. The vision quest is in many ways unknowable. So I'll just start with that. It is a direct confrontation with mystery, which is kind of the word quest is the root word of question, So it is there's something about the vision quest that's deeply mysterious. So I'll just start there. But if I was to try to, without giving someone too many expectations, explain the process and where it comes from, the quest there's many forms of quest, and vision quest is one of them. And it's generally the first quest that people partake. And worldwide, it's been used as a transformative practice, initiation, a rite of initiation. Mm-hmm. It's been used in shamanic training for forever. I mean, as far as we have history or even oral history, it's in there. So the beautiful thing about it, I think, is that it's so simple. It's one of the simplest technologies for transformation that I've encountered. And like you said, there's no external medicines or anything like that. It's just you and nature. And so, and the creator or the great mystery, however you want to think of that. So, I learned, so actually back to Tom Brown's story with, that book, that's the first time I encountered the idea of the quest. Was actually, he mentioned the vision quest a lot in his writing, and it seemed to be really important in the story. And so for me, actually, from a young age, it became part of my grammar, actually, part of how I thought about the world. It's there's this thing called the vision quest. It was just assumed. And that was helpful because it was super mysterious. And I, even from a young age, had a call to it myself. It's part of the tradition or the mythology, if you will, of Tom Brown's teaching. It's built into that fabric. So it, like I said, it was just kind of this assumed thing that, you go through a vision quest at some point. So it was through that lineage, though, through Stalking Wolf and through Tom, that Stalking Wolf had Tom go through Vision Quest when he was quite young as part of his training. And they would do them shoot like every season, maybe. And then eventually, when Tom started his school, he taught the Vision Quest process to one of his students. And one of his first students, Malcolm Ringwalt, who has a school called Earthheart. And Malcolm has since, Tom kind of gave him the Vision Quest portion or those teachings to take off and share with the world. And Malcolm has led, thousands of quests at this point, and has also taught a lot of people how to protect quests. And so my first Vision Quest was through Malcolm. This is, I think, 2004. And then I also, like the next year, I think after that I was like, whoa, and I won't get into my experience right now, but it was something so powerful and so meaningful to me that I was like, this is part of what I'm about. And so I did a Vision Quest protector training with Malcolm the next year. And that was where I started, I learned the real process of questing a little more deeply, but also how to protect a quest, which is the key, I think, in this tradition. So there's some, a person could wander off into the woods and have a transformative experience alone, but there's something about having a protected quest, which I'll explain. So that makes things a little different. And the main difference is, I think, the ability to be vulnerable. If you're out there by yourself trying to be at one with nature and do some sort of like deep transformative thing, there's part of you that's like, I still have to survive this and I still have to get back, even if I have to crawl back, to my car or whatever. It's like, I gotta be able to do that. But if you have someone, if someone's there that has your back, if someone's going to come and check on you in a few days, if you don't show up, then you can kind of go to a different space, so the quest itself, the structure is basically a 4-day solo experience where you're fasting. We say fasting from all things familiar, which means obviously you're fasting from food, but also from all of your normal routines and your day-to-day existence and even your beneficial practices, anything that is the framework that structures your life in the way that you know it, we let go of. And so you go into a secluded space that's in some, purity of nature where there's no significant man-made distractions. There's always airplanes flying over and stuff, but you don't want to be sitting there looking at a camper or a car or something. So you're out in the woods, generally by a tree or something, and you're in about a 10-foot circle. That's your committed space to do this experience. And so you create a boundary, either physically or in your mind, that you just commit to staying in. And you have the gear that you need, the minimal gear to support you. And it is minimal. I mean, we don't want you to be overly comfortable to where you will sleep the whole time, because that's a way of escaping. But you have enough to you have a sleeping bag and a tarp if it's going to rain or something, and you have water. We do this quest with water. And then other than that, it is just you, the earth, and the great mystery for 4 days. There's protocols as far as what you're doing. Questing is kind of it's an active state. It's an active process. I mean, you could just lay there and kind of survive for 4 days and just get through it, which, you would probably still have a lot of benefit from, but honestly, you would miss the point. So the quest is a process of searching and seeking and asking and questing. It's like you're asking for something. You are seeking, and that might be through formal questions you have in your mind. It might just be through an open heart, and a state of longing to know the big questions in your life. Why are you here? What is your purpose? What's your gifting? What is your direction? Sometimes quests are used when you have to make significant choices or changes in your life. And so there's something amazingly powerful about simplicity of just being in the purity of nature and letting go of everything and being alone. And it's that simple. And so, we have some work to set that up so that it's successful. And generally you do it with a group of people, which means they're not together exactly, but they're in the same, environment. And it is pretty, and you probably could speak to that too, but I find it powerful to quest within a group, because you kind of know, like, if they can do it, I can do it, because it does get hard. It can be challenging. But there, you can also quest alone, So I've led quests for individuals, and I've done quests alone. But yeah, so that's kind of the shape of it overall.
Hey there, just a few words about the incredible show sponsors for today's episode, and then we'll dig right back in. Today's show is brought to you by Veg Nutrition. Live better. So, I'm actually a veg elite athlete, and before I joined the team, I spent months doing my due diligence to make sure that the company was vision, mission, and value aligned with me, my values, my mission, my vision, and my lifestyle. I got to know the owners super well. I even got to know the person who formulates all the products, and they passed with flying colors. So I couldn't be more excited to represent a company that I feel so aligned with. And I want to tell you about two of my favorite products. The first is the veg pre workout. So when I first went vegan or mostly vegan, the last thing for me to go fully vegan was finding a vegan pre workout that gave me the focus, the energy, and the power that I was looking for. And I can tell you, this is the best pre workout that I've ever had. It gives me incredible focus and energy. And what's probably the best is it leaves me with no crash after I take it, which is great. And the flavors are so freaking good. There's literally peach mango and a Patriot Pop that tastes like, the firecracker popsicles, cherry lemon lime flavor. They're literally so good that I can dry scoop them. And they just released a watermelon flavor for just in time for summer, and it's incredible. So that's the first product. The second product is arguably also my favorite, and that's the plant protein. Comes in three incredible flavors: chocolate peanut butter, vanilla ice cream, and cold brew coffee. Yep, you heard me. Cold brew coffee flavor. It tastes incredible, all three flavors, 25 grams of protein, fully organic, incredible ingredients, heavy metal tested, and it is my go to post workout. Make sure that I'm recovering and refueling and giving my muscles the protein that they need to rebuild for that next workout. So go to vegnutrition.com/dragon and try their full line of supplements, and you'll get 15% off. Or you can just use Dragon at checkout and you'll get 15% off. So that's vegnutrition.com/dragon to get 15% off. Veg Nutrition, live better. Yeah, so some additional comments in color from my experiences. It's simple, but it's not easy. It's literally one of the hardest things I've ever done. And not physically hard. It's like you'd think the fasting from food and stuff would be the hard part. At least, that's what I thought it would be. I'd never, I'd done intermittent fasting, but I'd never done like a 96-hour fast. And so I thought that was going to be the hardest part for me. But there's so many challenging things about it, like literally just fasting from all your creature comforts, from technology, from books, from, media of all forms, from, the stimulation of like so many different environments that we, go through every day, whether that's your house or the school that you attend or the office building that you go to, or literally just, changing from one room to another room in your house, literally being in the same 10-foot space for 4 days. It's incredibly hard to be with yourself, literally just yourself in the same place for, 4 full days.
Yeah.
And, in my experience, there's definitely there was a lot of like I'm trying to think of like how to even like put it into words. There's a lot of resistance in the beginning, at least for me, like because we're so distracted in our modern world, constantly distracted by everything from like the fridge and all the food in it to, the piece of technology that all of us are carrying around, our smartphone, to, computers, to other people, right?
Yeah.
Like you're constant, like even if you're working from home, you have like meetings, like Zoom meetings with people, and to literally be by yourself for 4 days, I can imagine, for some people that could be one of the scariest things in the world, to truly be by yourself for 4 days. And for me, it was incredibly hard because you actually like realize like just how crazy you are. At least that was part of my experience. Is I was just like, oh my God, my mind is absolutely out of control.
Yeah.
Because it's like doesn't know what to do with itself because there's no external stimulation. And so really was a really, incredible, mysterious experience for me, in the sense that like at times it would be like so hard and so like dismal and dire, and I was like, I just want this to end. And then I'd like break through to these like oasis of like peace and, altered, almost like an altered state of consciousness, and like, glimpses of where my life could go would come through and like crystal clear. And then that would be like amazing. And that I had no clock. So I didn't know if that was for like 30 seconds or 3 hours
Right.
that I was in that oasis. And then I'd be like back in the struggle again with my mind.
Mhm.
And, literally the first time I did it, when I came out of it, I was like, that was the hardest thing that like I've ever done. And I want to do it again, like ASAP, because it was like so incredible. And then like a few weeks go by and I'm like, no, I don't want to do that again. That was so fucking hard. Like I never want to do that shit again.
Yeah.
And like still to this day, like I'm like, how the fuck did I do a second one 2 years later? And even after that second one, I was like, oh God, I want to do another one. And then some time goes by and I'm like, no, I don't want to do another one. That shit is so fucking hard.
Yeah.
I don't want to be without my phone for 4 days. I don't want to like, be in the same place, because you're like, I don't know. It's just wild. It's so hard to put into words. And like, I probably sound like I'm on drugs as I'm like describing this whole thing. Right. But it's like you said, it is such a simple technology, but it's incredibly powerful and incredibly hard.
Yeah.
And I will say the comment that it is incredibly helpful. It was for me, knowing that there was other people questing with me. So there's the kind of shared experience, right? Like, okay, there's like a group of us that are like doing this really hard thing together. And there's like almost an immediate bond that forms like among you and your fellow questers. And then, in some of those tough times when you're out there, you're like, okay, I'm not going to be the one who like gives up early, right? Like it'll be someone else, but it won't be me. And there's strength in that. And I think that's like strength in like humanity, right? That we almost don't recognize that like we go so much farther and do so much more like incredible things because like we're in this together with other people, whether that's a vision quest or building a company or, getting through a health challenge, whatever it is. And there's two pieces to kind of the process that I think are really important to mention that you didn't bring up, is the preparation and the post-quest processing. So can you speak a little bit about the preparation and the post-quest processing? Because it sounds like you show up, Ben throws you in the woods and it's like, see you in 4 days. But there's a little bit more to that.
Yeah, there's a lot to it, isn't there? So the program, I think of it as a program where the event takes place over 8 days. And so 4 of those days, kind of in the center, you are doing the quest actively. The quest actually begins when you feel called to quest. So for some people, that's years. Some people, it's months. Some people, it's hopefully not just a few days, because that's quite a shock to the system. But there's usually some time before where you're just like, it's kind of on your mind and you kind of get this calling. And I consider the preparation starting there. So if people contact me around doing a vision quest, like when Justin did, or when you did, I will ask them a few questions, just kind of make sure that's what they're looking for. I will send them some work to do so that they have a little bit of can prepare ahead of time by, facing some of the things the challenges that may come up, and go through kind of a long application process so that you kind of have to really think about it, that kind of stuff. And then
you make us work for it.
Yeah, make you work for it, man. You gotta know what you're getting into. So it takes a while to really let people know that this is not just a camp out. This is like, you're getting into something here. So, so that's the pre-preparation. Then there's the physical preparation right before we quest. So on the first day of the program, we get together, we kind of have this chance to get to know each other and share some of our concerns and all that stuff and fears, and just kind of create the container for the quest to happen. And that's really important, it's like you're going on a voyage, and we're all getting on a boat and we're going to go on some trip together, and it's going to be crazy. Maybe, who knows, it's mysterious, it's like, you want to know the passengers, you want to know who you're with. So we have this little time to do that. Then the next day we do a physical preparation of getting people familiar with the site itself. So you're going to we go out and everyone finds or gets to know their request spot very well. We have this process of setting up a communication system with the protector, in this case me, where I'm indirectly communicating, if need be, through a marking box, we call it. Mm-hmm. We kind of have layers of, lecture or teachings that are helping you prepare throughout the day. So we're doing that as well. And then that evening, we also do a ceremony, which is really to set the commitment. It's a commitment ceremony to set the beginning and mark the beginning of the quest for people. So there's protocols, and there's kind of this whole approach around it. And as a protector, what I'm doing is really keeping an eye on where people's resistance is, helping them deal with that. Also assessing like how people are kind of sneaking in distractions, because we just do, it's nothing, people aren't trying to do it like in a bad way. It's just, we don't know we're doing it, so we're very, very particular. We'll check people's gear. We'll just talk to them about different needs and stuff. I've had we have like exceptions for people that smoke, because we don't want the quest to become just about that addiction. We want it to be a quest. So there might be some, accommodations for that, for people who have legitimate like health issues with food or blood sugar stuff. We have accommodations for that. So we have to go over all these things to make sure that the experience, there's nothing that could possibly chase someone out of the experience except for themselves. So there's no reason to have to leave. So that's why we prepare. We want people to be there, know what they're getting into, and have what they need to get through it. So, and as you mentioned, it can be really challenging. It can be really beautiful. I've had people just be like, that was amazing. It was just blissed out the whole time. Like, wow, awesome. And other people, it's total hell, And then those same people, it could be reversed. The next quest they do, it's like, oh my gosh, I thought that was going to be easy. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. And then other people, it's like amazing. So it's all over the board, and I think that speaks to the aliveness of it, actually, and also our ongoing evolution and development. So then we have the kind of the debriefing, or as you mentioned, the post-quest process, which, man, if preparation is important, this is also very important, because one of my favorite moments is the last morning, or I guess the final morning, when people are coming out of the woods. And it's like it's like these souls are just floating out of the woods, it's the most amazing thing. So people are coming out. Honestly, nobody has any idea of how much they've gone through until they leave their quest. And it's amazing. I mean, it's every time. For me, every time personally, I come out, I'm just like, whoa, I was somewhere, because this is very different. You encounter all of the everyday stuff, So I make sure to a lot of distance and kind of create this, like, like in a spaceship, they have that air chamber that they come in from space and they go into the airlock and then they enter the spaceship. It's like that. You got to have this bubble that captures people before they just run back to the wild, So we spend quite a bit of time there. The real focus is actually, it's reintegration, but also capturing and preserving what you got. So we spend the whole day journaling, really, and capturing. And then I'm just kind of there to monitor and hold the space and make sure people don't kind of just go crazy and get on their phone and like run out and call everyone they know and tell them they love them or whatever is going on, because that's people have just you just don't know where you are. You're just wide open, you know? So it's like you just kind of like preserve all that energy, like kind of keep it there and let it just all go, stay in you, go into your journal. And then it takes a day and a half of really kind of preparing people and helping them realize what they've gone through, and then reintroducing food as part of that, kind of grounding them. And then really a legitimate like preparation for like, okay, so you have this week you have about 6 days, 7 days of being very malleable. You're going to be very transparent. You're going to feel different, and you're going back to your world, and your world has a shape in it that looks like it's the shape that you were. There's a hole there. And if you run back as this fluid creature, you'll just fill that shape again, and you'll just be the same person. Or you can make new choices right now and protect this and choose again, you know? It's a chance to choose who you want to be and reinvent yourself. And I mean, I've never personally felt and also seen the clearing that it creates, that you can just literally choose different. So really try to protect that for people. That's part of the protector's role. And then, encourage them with some basic protocols as they reenter their world, maybe to like, not go to work right away. Like if you can take another few days or something to reintegrate and redefine and all that. So really important.
Yeah. Some additional reflections. So I really appreciated how there is kind of like like I'll call it the pregame to the vision quest, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there is, like literally a day and a half, 2 days of preparation, and it allows you to come out of like whatever, you were going through in your life and start to like leave that out, in civilization, and then start to like come into this new environment that is very distraction free and compared to like the civilized world. And that process right there, in my own experience, it started to kind of like ground me and really allow me to like, okay, like what am I hoping to, derive from this vision quest? Like, why am I like here? I said all these reasons, and kind of like the homework that is required to do before you get accepted into the quest, and really reflect, like, are these, the questions that I want to be asking when I'm out there? Is this the stuff I want to be thinking about while I'm out there? And really just starts to shift you into that, just another state of consciousness, really. Because you can't like snap your fingers and just like, great, I'm in like quest mode. That's like it wouldn't work if we tried to do that. And I also really appreciate how you kind of protect, people before they go back out into this civilized world. So there's kind of this like ramping down of, I don't know, consciousness or like civilized consciousness into a more like pure or primal consciousness. And then you go into this primal consciousness for like 4 intense days. And then you come out of it and it's like, okay, we're going to put you back into civilized consciousness, but we're going to go slow.
Yeah.
And it's crazy that like for me, when I even came out, like I wasn't even hungry. I was still not interested in food. And I know for some people, that is actually one of the biggest challenges they go through there is the food the entire time. I thought that was going to be my experience just because my own, challenges with like food and my relationship to my body. But like literally after like maybe the first day, food just was not even on my mind at all. So that was really interesting to me is I think, and you've definitely protected or been around a lot more people that have been through quests than me. Is it frequent that people think a particular thing is going to be their challenge? They go into the quest and that ends up being something totally different?
It is surprisingly frequent. Yeah. It's funny. Sometimes some things are pretty predictable, but often it's like Yeah, totally wasn't a thing. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm doing my best to kind of like share some of my experience, but not too much of it that it's like disrespectful kind of the process as well as my own vision quest. But there, some of the high level things for me is, I spoke of this a little bit. It was almost like I was able to get a clearer picture of where I was headed, which was really powerful. But I'll make one comment. It's kind of like this receding horizon, right?
Right.
So like you can see it, but it's not super crystal clear. And then it's like as you go towards it, it like continues to recede.
Yeah.
But it's like infinitely clearer than like when you're in the civilized world, you're like in between a bunch of concrete buildings and you can't even see a horizon.
Right.
Is kind of how I feel about it. So when you go out in this vision quest, it's like, hey, you get out of the concrete jungle and you're actually in this like wide open, on top of a mountain where you can like just look like for leagues and leagues into this like infinite horizon. You're like, oh my God, I'm starting to see like potentially places like my life could go. And that is incredibly powerful because when I came out of Quest, I just had so much greater sense of a direction for my own life and where I truly, the true me was like meant to go. And then kind of a less kind of esoteric kind of like gains is literally just having the opportunity to consume caffeine or stimulants or be on my phone. That in itself is an incredible reboot. So like when I came out of my first quest, I literally, and I've said this and it like might be a little controversial, I literally felt like I was on like MDMA for like weeks on end. I was like, bliss was just like pouring out of me, like constantly. And it like, everything was beautiful. Like, and like, even like things that were like normally challenges or annoyances in my life, I was like, oh, this is so amazing. Like, I get to like work on this challenge. Like, I get to face this problem. This is incredible. And like, it completely shifted my perception of reality. And also like when I picked up my phone, it's like, this is a magical tool. Like, this is insane. Like all the like beaming lights into my eyes and the fact that I can like connect to anyone in the world. Like, it was just like a total reset for my life. And like, I want to encourage anyone who just is looking for like a reset or a reboot or a reroute into their own life. Like, even if you don't get a single glimpse of where you're meant to go, just that reset, reboot, reroute is worth the challenge because it's incredible. And that the detoxing that our body goes through for like 96 hours of, there's a lot of science now on fasting that allows like our bodies to do a lot more autophagy where we're actually, getting rid of the cancerous cells and the damaging materials within our body. And like, you might do a 1-day fast, but you do 4 days of that and you're getting like a super intensive of that. So
totally,
everyone's like questing experience is going to be like totally different, but I do think it is something that if you do feel called to it, that you should pursue it. And one of the reasons I wanted to do this podcast was to share the quest with more people. So more people had a chance to be like, oh, I feel that calling. And now they have somebody and like a training school, Ben and Tribal Edge that they can reach out to. And then, Ben will make sure that you really want to actually do it. But this conversation is incredible because it's very hard for me to like, people ask me like, Justin, what's one of the most transformative things you have ever done? And it's always like Vision Quest is number one, always still to this day. And then they're like, okay, explain it to me. And I'm like, yeah, it's kind of challenging. So like now I can be like, go listen to this podcast and it'll give you more of a glimpse.
Yeah, nice.
And so for me, this is like part of my service of, taking the quest and sharing it with more people because, my mission is to empower people to proactively design and truly live their best life. Right. And I think for many people, a quest could be the thing that empowers them to actually build that life for themselves, because it removes all the distractions in their life that are keeping them from actually getting around to finally designing their best life. And that's a every evolving process. But then once you get like some space from the rest of the world, like as far as I'm concerned, like the quest never leaves you once you do it. Like I still feel that energy with me. Like I was getting goosebumps when you're talking about it, like, and it just like flashbacks of like the energy and the experience for myself, both the positive parts of it, but also the like, fuck, that was so hard part of it. So I really appreciate you diving pretty deep into the vision quest. So if you are feeling called, we'll at the, I'll just say it now, that you can connect with Ben at tribaledge.life. And we'll also put his contact information that he's happy to share in the show notes. So if anyone is feeling called to, do a quest, you can reach out to Ben and Tribal Edge, and we'll put the contact details in the show notes. So there are some other topics that I do want to talk about. And I want to go a little bit into kind of the archetypes, the perceiver, the provider, the preserver, and the protector. And kind of one of the first ones that I want, and we might not go through all of them, but this has just been like a personal interest to me. So I've realized that the perceiver, or like the tracker, like that is such a powerful skill that, it's a skill and it's an archetype that we all have access to, even in like an urban setting. And what I've noticed for myself is like the more things I track, the more present they become in my life. And the more I'm actually able to get where I want to go. So like, for example, anytime I want to achieve something, I always look for like, what is the metric that I should track that will lead me to the destination that I'm trying to get to. So can you help me like thread this kind of like idea of tracking in the wilderness, and like what, like, if someone were to come to you and like, be put into, through one of your programs, like what are they actually learning to do? And maybe the two of us, or you or me, can kind of explain how this could translate into real, like into non-wilderness life.
Cool. Yeah. So yeah, tracking is eternally relevant. It doesn't matter what domain we are talking about. It's as relevant now as ever. And I think part of that is, and I don't have perfect evidence for this, but I do have kind of a hypothesis, and I'm not alone with this, that tracking was potentially one of the activities or skills that kind of made us human in a sense, in the sense of our ability to have metacognition, the ability to reflect on the fact that we're reflecting, to have awareness of our awareness. So now I don't know if that's true, but it certainly lines up with some of the way tracking works and the way it impacts us. So there's actually a great book called, Tracking the Origin of Science, which I think it's a pretty practical book on tracking, in terms of wildlife and stuff, but it also gets into looking at basically what I was just saying, that the brains that develop tracking are human brains, I mean, animals do track to some degree. They follow scent. They make sense of their environment. They hear noises and all that stuff. They're responding to stimulus. As far as we know, they're not running these simulations of probability like we do. They're not seeing into the future. They're not taking past evidence and going, oh, that must mean this. They're in a different space. So tracking is basically, it's using our ability to detect patterns and to make inferences and to interpret and to basically, find meaning in information, right? So it's the whole ability that we have of adding story to our lives. It really is. So at kind of a general level. So, because there's the events, there's what happens, right? And then there's what we make it mean, that whole thing, right? That relationship. And so tracking is first the ability to observe. So can you use your sensory awareness, and can you detect the information that you need to on the landscape? So generally how we teach this, we talk about it as in order to detect something, you kind of have to know, in order to detect a change, which would be a track in an environment, you kind of need to know what the baseline of the environment is. And that's one of the fundamental teachings really, is this awareness of baseline. So you need awareness, which is basically taking in a general sense of the baseline. So if I'm in a room right now, the room has a baseline in terms of temperature, in terms of noise, in terms of objects laying around, and all this stuff. There's a lot of information here. And if I get familiar with that information, then when something shifts and there's a change, it becomes really obvious to me. Whereas someone who's never been in the room wouldn't know that there's a change, right? They wouldn't know what's new. So the new things in any baseline are what we think of as tracks. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that's kind of one way to think of it, is a track is a change in the baseline. So it really means that what trackers do is they get really familiar with many, many baselines. They become kind of curious about everything, is another way of saying that. So, and they're just paying attention. So if you just practice paying attention to your environment and get to know, in the literal sense, to look at tracking as a hard skill, you might spend a lot of time looking at dirt,
Mm-hmm.
So you're looking at sand, you're looking at clay, you're looking at leafy soil, looking at grass, you're looking at all these, we call them substrates, that potentially could hold a track. But often as a tracker, I'm not looking at tracks. I'm looking at substrates. I'm looking at environments. And then sometimes something will show up for me that's an anomaly or something different. And as humans, that's what we notice, is different in general. We get very normalized really quick to any stimulus, even painful stuff. We can get kind of normalized, but then when there's a spike of difference, we go, whoa, what was that? So you're training that capacity to notice different, but as a tracker, you're training it to notice the different that you want to notice. The difference then makes a difference. You're looking for specific differences, because there's all kinds of different all the time. So if I'm tracking, well, just an example, it snowed here kind of recently, and I was out behind my place getting some wood, and it was dark, but there was this one little ray of light coming from the house that was shining on the ground. And I just saw part of a track, and I'm walking over to get the wood, and I'm just like, what? Just kind of, it popped into my mind, because I'm looking at this thing. I'm like, it's not a raccoon. It's not a cat. It's not a dog. What the heck is that? And then I realized right away it was an opossum, which is strange. That the reason it popped out was we don't have opossums, or until recently we haven't had them. They've been showing up here in the last couple of years. So there's been a big influx in them. So this is the first time I've encountered a possum track in our backyard, but I wouldn't have probably, quote, seen it, because it wasn't, well, the only reason I saw it was because it was different. Otherwise, raccoon track, okay, may not have paid attention to that. They're there all the time, right? So there was something about the weird thumb of the opossum that just caught my brain. I'm just like, what the heck is that? So, and I wasn't looking for it. It just popped out. So that's what practicing tracking gives you, is this sensitivity to anomalies and to the patterns that they make. Maybe just start with that.
Yeah. So this is incredible, because it ties to a major theme of this podcast, which is entrepreneurship. So entrepreneurs are notorious for kind of like seeing the change in the environment before everybody else.
Exactly.
So they will notice this emerging technology that is disrupting the normal environment, and their pattern recognition is at a elevated or higher level than the majority of the rest of society. And so they're able to create a service or a business or a transformation by their ability to see this anomaly that everyone around them is completely oblivious to. And this is why, I'm so excited to dig into tracking, is because the process explanation, as well as the physical process of tracking, is so relevant for anyone and everyone, because not just entrepreneurs, right? what are like, it's like if you think about like tracking an animal, you're using anomalies in the environment to predict where that animal is going to be, right?
Mhm.
And so you can do the same thing in your own life. You can start to see like what are the tracks that are like, where are they leading to? And like, is that where you want to go? Or do you need to start like searching for new tracks that lead you to where you want to go? So like, if the, the air quotations animal is not the animal that you want to track, but you're tracking towards it, then you're like, all right, I got to start tracking somewhere else. And like, just to put it into more color, if that animal is like someone who is, becoming significantly more ill, or more overweight or burnt out or unhappy in their career, like you're on the wrong track, right? And so then you can start to identify like, oh, what are the tracks that will lead me to the animal that I want, and the animal is you, right? Like in the way I'm explaining it. And the great thing that we have as humans is this pattern recognition, but then we have all these patterns to follow, right? Which are other people who have like achieved or are doing what we want to do, right? So, Ben and I are both huge fans of Tony Robbins, and one of Tony Robbins' like principal teachings is like the fastest way to like, become who you want to become is to model someone else, which is the same thing as track their tracks, right? So you're literally like following their tracks to become, or do the things that they do that you want to do in your own life. And this is why I think tracking, is so incredible, and it's such a skill. And we all have it. We're all tracking things. Some of us are more intentional about than others, but it's like one of those things, like I think if you practice, tracking in the woods, there's like a direct translation into your life that you're able to apply, because you're like getting in the dirt and you're bringing it down to this really like almost fundamental, primal, essential level, right? Because, we had to track the animals in order to, survive. And then you're able to take that honed skill and put it into, your current reality. So,
that's great. I love that. It's exactly how I say it. I mean, it's so translatable because, I mean, as I was saying, I think it's fundamentally one of our human capacities. It's something that makes us uniquely human. And to practice the skill in any form, I mean, to practice it in the dirt, as you said, it's transferable because you're actually training your brain to work in a certain way,
Yeah.
and we are all tracking all the time. Like you said, it's definitely back to the Tony Robbins thing. He also, one of the quotes I like is, the quality of your life is the quality of the questions you're asking, and we're always asking those three questions. What am I going to focus on? What am I going to make it mean? And what am I going to do? Right. That is the tracking process right there. But I wanted to mention that because tracking can also be described as basically dwelling in a state of active, open questioning. So it's a questioning mindset. Stockton Wolf, Tom Brown's teacher, called it the sacred question, living the sacred question. Sacred meaning something that's meaningful, very powerful, meaningful, continuously over time, And so living in this space of questioning, you're actually training yourself to break down the boundaries of our normal thinking. So instead of just being satisfied with like, oh, that's just, even in your life, that's just my wife, you just like just kind of imprisoned her in this identity that you just kind of like label, right? You just kind of casually label. And we do this because it's easy, because it's efficient, is to just kind of like, in fact, we're deleting most of our environment all the time just because of the cognitive overload. But if you can push into that a little bit and just kind of expand and be like, who is this person today? even though I've been with her for 20 years, who is she today? Let her continue to evolve and to, her identity keep being revealed to you. It creates this sacred life, this life where everything becomes amazing. And you're part of this. If you're asking these questions, and when I walk out the door, I'm noticing the temperature, I'm looking at the tracks on the ground, I'm noticing, the sound of the birds and all this stuff. It's like you become part of this massive narrative that is the universe itself, that it's like this ongoing story that you get to be part of and part to and listen in on, and that's part of, I think, what tracking gives you the gift of. So anyway, I wanted to mention that idea of living in the question, which ties back to the vision quest, right? By the way, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Hey there, just a few words about the incredible show sponsors for today's episode, and then we'll dig right back in. This show is brought to you by Feel Free from Botanic Tonics. This product is unlike anything I've ever had before. No joke. It's made with kava root and other ancient plants, and just half a shot gives me this incredible sense of focused flow and productivity. And I love to take just half a shot right before I work out. I take it with my pre-workout, and it takes my workouts to the next level. It is seriously unlike anything I've ever had. It's also an incredible productivity tool for any big work projects that you have, or long periods of time where you just need to be super focused in flow state and get a lot of shit done. So if you want to give this a shot, you can go to botanictonics.com and use code DRAGON at checkout to get 40% off your first order. No joke, 40% off with code DRAGON. That's Feel Free from botanictonics.com, code DRAGON. Feel free, feel good. Yeah, and what you just explained there is like an incredible way to become present with your own life, right? Is through this tracking of, noticing the temperature, noticing the birds, noticing the tracks, noticing the changes in the environment. And when you're in that present state, like life, that's why they call it present, is because it's literally a gift, right? And that's when we're most at peace. But most of the time we're somewhere mentally in the future or in the past, and we're never in the present. And tracking, when you start to track, it pulls you into the present.
Yeah.
And that's where time can do funny things, right? Where it's like, like a minute could feel like an hour, or 3 hours could feel like a minute. And it's just it's really eternal. Magical. Yeah. It's a very magical place to be. So that's another, reason that I really love tracking is, and for the audience, I've never done any like formal training in wilderness tracking. So like, I don't want the audience to think that I'm, this like a person who's spent a lot of time doing this. My access point has been the Vision Quest. And, I think there's a lot of kind of natural learning about tracking that you notice or that you accumulate during a quest, because you're in the same environment. So you start to notice like the smallest changes. It's like, oh my God, that leaf moved. Like, totally. And like, and so like, that's, and then there's just understanding the concept of tracking, both at a primal level, in nature. It allows you to then start to apply that to, our current environment, right? And that's what I'm hoping to share with the audience, is for them to like start to notice everything in their current environment, like all the different pieces in their, home, and like how those actually really do change, like in subtle but real ways every day. And I loved what you said about, allowing your wife to reveal herself to you every day, to like actually be aware of the changes and transformations that she's going through literally every single day.
Yeah.
And then you can start to see the themes and the patterns emerging, like that will illustrate an entire year of transformation for your partner. And then being present to that, you realize like just how much of a gift they are to you, right? And it's again by like using tracking to pull yourself into the present with your partner, then allows you to cherish. You literally use the word like, it's like, it's sacred, right? Then you start to have a sacred relationship with your partner. And I think that's profound.
Yeah.
So,
there's a couple other things, unless you had something to say there.
No, go ahead.
That I think are worth mentioning. One is tracking is another way to look at it. So I think a lot of our challenges, perhaps as humans collectively, but also individually, is I think it goes to like the core problem that we have is that is our relationship to the uncertainty and to the unknown. I think most of our problems can be traced back to basically we just don't like to not know stuff. We're uncomfortable with the unknown, and so we make up stories. We do all this stuff to kind of cover that up, right? Tracking it tends to lead one towards this embracing of mystery, to where you're just okay not knowing, and it's like you don't have to fill in all the stuff and make up a bunch of stories. You become kind of painfully aware of how much you do that anyway. You kind of become aware of the story making, meaning making creatures we are. And then there's also like this scientific approach of you also become just very good at, you practice observation and you start to suspend this interpretation and this meaning making and dwell in mystery a little longer in the state of aporia, or the state of, willingly not knowing, or willingly being confused. And until you get insight, until you actually get genuine insight and knowledge and wisdom. And so I think just being able to suspend the gap of our immediate need to just like, resist the unknown and uncertainty and just embrace the mystery a little longer is really powerful, because for a number of ways. I mean, it allows us to be more present, as you said. I think it allows us to have more, a better relationship with intuition and with our, and kind of become more aware of our self-deception and, in that sense, encounter more wisdom. So there's a lot of, it's a powerful thing. So the other thing I wanted to mention was tracking is it starts to open up a way of seeing the world through relationship. And so it brings, it activates, I think it quite naturally activates a healthy relationship between both hemispheres of the brain. If you have followed any of Ian McGilchrist's work lately, The Master and His Emissary, familiar with that book? Great stuff. Anyway, there's some really good descriptions in his work around, this relationship between the left and right hemisphere that really kind of give an outline of what tracking does. So I think we're, in general, very deficient in right hemisphere, cognition in our culture. We're very left dominant, which means we're often seeing the world as basically a series of things and a series of events and a series of objects instead of a whole. And so we're very focused on the parts. Tracking gives us a way to practice interacting with the world as a whole and through relationships. So as I mentioned, like stepping out the door and, noticing the temperature and the bird language and the activity around, but also the tracks at the same time. It also includes my internal landscape, how I'm feeling, what am I bringing into this environment? But when you do that as a practice, especially, you start to realize that there's no such thing as a track. Okay, because everything is part of a story. Everything is connected. So if I'm looking at that opossum track outside, I'm not, the opossum track is a bit of information inside of a huge story. Why was the opossum track there at that time? What was it doing, right? What was influencing its behavior? Where is it now? That kind of stuff. So all of these questions start to thread into all of this relational activity. So in fact, recently, last few years, I'm starting to realize that tracks themselves, if we think of it classically like a footprint in the ground, a track is a relationship. There's not actually something there. There's actually just a depression of where something was, right? So it's a literal representation of a relationship between the earth and a foot. But there's not a thing there. So they're actually not things. They're literally relationships. So it's, when I say relational too, it's like a way of describing, it helps us see the unseen. The relational realm is the unseen realm. It's the thing, it's the stuff that we discount. We kind of look at the world again as like objects and things, but that's only very, it's only part of the story. It's all of the relationships between things, which they're not tangible. So we kind of discount them. But in the sense that you're talking about as the entrepreneur or someone who's trying to detect trends and stuff like that, it's like being sensitive to relationships and being able to perceive that landscape, that relational landscape, is very, very powerful.
Yeah. I mean, that's what many would say a great visionary entrepreneur does, is they see the unseen before it's seen.
Exactly.
Which is really cool. I'm going to save the other archetypes for a follow-up interview, because there's some other, to go through all the archetypes would take several hours. But I do want to transition, because I think what we're really speaking about right now is education and teaching at a more kind of macro or meta level, right? Getting educated as a tracker, teaching, skills that translate into other things. So, I know you're kind of going through your own evolution of education and teaching. Can you share some of both sides of that, both the teaching that you teach and then also your own education? I'll leave it up to you which one you want to tackle first.
Yeah, well, they're certainly connected. So let's see. Yeah, I think, well, first of all, education as a calling for me, it seems like one of the longest levers the best levers we have currently for affecting change in the world, which I think is really important to focus on right now. We have obviously a number of challenges that we're facing, and there's different ways to approach these things, but I think education is one of our most powerful tools. And so, some people are just called there, and I feel like I was. I guess one thing I've noticed lately is, I've been interacting with more and more kind of the academic sphere in terms of education, but also solving problems. I think I mentioned to you earlier the work of John Vervaeke, who is a he's a cognitive scientist and psychologist from Toronto University. And he put out recently a series, which I recommend to anyone watching this. It's free on YouTube. It's called Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. And it's actually taking off really, really amazingly right now. But so there's a whole kind of corner of the internet that's focusing on the meta crisis and these different problems that we're facing. And the meaning crisis is a significant one. It seems to be kind of at the core because, if people aren't able to find meaning in their lives, all kinds of problems emerge from that, but they're also intertwined. There's reasons people aren't finding meaning in their lives as well. So anyway, John's working on that angle. And as I went through his course, I have this whole approach that I've done for 20 years now, and before that, my own education, and then my continuous training. And then as I was been teaching this stuff for 20 years now, and I listened to this series and it kind of like short-circuited me a little bit. And I'm going through a phase of reinterpreting all of my work, which has been a real project. So part of the reason for that, just I guess, hopefully this is relevant, is, the way I learned was kind of a traditional mentorship type embodied approach. It was really deep. And I learned through what's called a coyote approach or coyote teaching, which means essentially that you are learning more than you think you are, and you're being led through a process of learning rather than having knowledge pushed into you, right? So it's this drawing knowledge and with insight and wisdom out of you through experience and through setting up the conditions for an experience versus didactically just shoving it in. So our traditional educational system, by the way, is just the opposite. Basically it's like, here's what to think, learn this, memorize this, and then regurgitate it, and then go do cool stuff. It's like, what if you did cool stuff, then tried to make sense of what you did and share that? Which is kind of how I ended up learning. My education was this process of, like I said, deep embodied experience, and then acquiring skills and having these things change my perspective, and finally kind of get to the point where I could actually articulate and explain what it meant, And so that's one of the things I'm working on right now in terms of education is realizing that the dominant model of education goes from what John would describe. I'll just use one of his models real quick. Is we have 4 ways of knowing, basically. And one, I'll just start from the traditional model, which is kind of this top-down approach. One he calls propositional knowing, which is, where facts, and it's basically fact-based knowledge. It's like, that cats are mammals, and that, the sun is a star and stuff like that. So that it's like, it's fact-based knowledge, and it gives you a sense of confidence and conviction, and we have debates about stuff and blah, blah, blah. That's kind of where our typical educational model hangs out, right? Another form of knowing, or another way of knowing, he calls procedural knowledge, or procedural knowing, which is based on the development and cultivation of skills. And so if you're training in something and developing skills, you're not doing that from a propositional way necessarily. You're doing it from a hands-on, gaining experience, making mistakes, and refining kind of your motor skills if it's a physical skill, that kind of stuff. So you're doing this whole other set of this whole other approach to learning. So, and that tends to give people a sense of kind of competence and power. When you have a certain skill in something, you have a different feeling than just, say, a conviction about something, or just believe something. That's propositional knowledge. And then we have perspectival knowing, which is the kind of knowing of what it's like to be a certain way, or what something is like. So if I have the perspective of being a tree climber because I've climbed trees my whole life, and that's something that I just gained through that experience, and I see the world a certain way because of that, right? And there's other ways of seeing the world that I don't have, and I would have to have those experiences. I don't have the experience of, being a woman. It's just not something I have. I can imagine, I can try it on, I can kind of like try to see through that perspective, but it's not me. So that's perspectival knowing. And then there's participatory knowing, which is what it's like to belong to something. And it's kind of your sense of where your sense of identity comes from, your sense of self. And so when you are learning from that perspective, it's when you start to feel at home in a place, or you feel this sense of deep connection, where you're just like, this is, of course, of course you run around barefoot. It's like, I feel at home in my woods here. It feels like a place of rightness, of fitting to it. And so anyway, those are 4 types of knowing that I think have affected, and this is before I encountered John Vervaeke's work. I was going through this process of basically a bottom-up approach. So I just listed it from propositional to procedural to perspectival to participatory, right? So that's the typical academic path, is you learn a bunch of things to believe, just take this as being true, and then you're supposed to develop and then go implement it into a skill and develop certain perspectives, and eventually you will be kind of a authority, right? You'll have a certain like embodiment. My experience of learning it, and the way I teach, is actually, here's an experience. I'm going to set up conditions so that you have an experience. I'm not going to tell you what that's going to be. It's yours, but we're going to go, here's a blindfold. We're going to go try to find a certain tree, or find your partner who's also blindfolded out in the woods. What does that mean? I don't know what that means. I know some things that it could mean. But anyway, some sort of embodied experience, or the vision quest is another example, where there's no set thing to believe or interpret it as. You're going to discover what that means. And so you have this embodied experience, and you have enough of those over time, you end up gaining new perspectives about how things work. You might be like, wow, that was weird when I was blindfolded. I feel like I could kind of see through the blindfold at points, and I knew there was going to be a tree there, and I put my hand out and there, sure enough, there was, and so it kind of shifts how you think the world works. It might kind of blur some of your the boundaries that you thought were, or limits that you thought were possible, right? So you start to sense maybe things aren't quite as I thought they were. And then in that process, you develop skill sets. You develop these skills of tracking. You just develop the skills of awareness or whatever it is, or making a fire, But as you're doing that, it's also shifting your perspective, because you're not just making your fire, you're making it for a certain purpose or in a certain way, often from a certain kind of sacredness or appreciation. Anyway, so all kinds of these embodied experiences, and when you layer them all together and the perspectives shifts that happen and the skills that are developed, eventually you arise at this place of like, wow, I have something meaningful to share here. I have something I believe to be true. And it came from this bottom up perspective, growth and development, rather than a starting with beliefs and working your way down to embodiment. So that's kind of the long version of something I'm trying to, I guess, develop into. I'm trying to learn how to share that contrast and to bring that in some form into the educational system that we have, through training teachers, training coaches, training trainers, people that are influencing and teaching people, and sharing this idea of this primal developmental path that I don't think it needs to replace the academic path. I think it needs to support it. I think they need to merge together, and I think they feed each other really well. So the work I'm doing now is focusing on working with nature educators, people that are doing nature school startups, or starting schools, and people that are getting into that field. I'm kind of doing more consulting in that area and helping people develop curriculums that preserve that embodiment and that growth, but also don't just do it willy-nilly and kind of work randomly, but do it in a way that you're going to end up with kind of in the area we want, to where there's intelligible, useful material at the end. It's not just random experiences. I think that's part of the coyote thing, is there is a place that we're trying to get together, but I'm not going to tell you exactly how to get there. I'm just going to keep shifting the conditions until you arrive there. So rather than telling you, hey, go over there and learn that thing, it's like, no, it's like this area, close off this option, enhance this option, kind of adjust the circumstances until they encounter the lesson. So,
so a couple comments. One, I think the Vision Quest is completely like an embodied experience with yourself, right? So it creates an environment where you can actually get to know yourself, right? Where most of the time we're so distracted, we don't even have an opportunity to get to know ourselves at all, because we're literally so distracted by everything, including, food and, everything in our environment, right? And then that shifts our perspective once we have that kind of like participatory knowing with ourselves. That then shifts our perspective, like in many, if not all aspects, post Vision Quest, which then alters our kind of like procedural knowing, which then kind of either confirms or denies in a whole new way propositional knowing.
Right.
And all that entire process leads to, in my personal opinion, a much greater sense of self-mastery over oneself and life. And like, that's what been trying to share with people, is like a Vision Quest will give you more self-mastery over yourself and your life that is unavailable to you because you're too distracted. And you don't have an environment that can actually grant you that type of knowing with yourself. And I'm sure, like you said, there's been Vision Quests since the dawn of like humanity, right?
Yeah.
And there's, monks going into the caves and, being by themselves for 30 days or years or months or whatever. And like every civilization has a Vision Quest that forces you, it creates an environment or a construct or a container where you actually get to know yourself.
Right.
And that's what I love about the Vision Quest so much, is deepens your inner knowing so much. And one of the other things that you brought up was intuition, right? Like, we all have an inner knowing. We all have an intuition, like you mentioned with the, I feel like there might be a tree like in front of me when you're blindfolded. And we all have that. It's a question of whether or not we're going to connect to that inner knowing and tap into it. The other thing is, I think the experiential learning, what you're talking about, in my personal opinion, is like the most powerful and transformative learning that you can undergo. Because like, you can study a book all day about how to ride a bike, but until you try to ride a bike, like, it doesn't matter. Like, yeah, you could study the facts beforehand, and it might speed up your experiential learning process, but you still have to go through the experiential learning process. And like, you could even argue somebody who spends 10 hours learning about how to ride a bike from books, if a different person or like the exact same person were just go out and spend 1 hour trying to learn how to like ride a bike, and had a teacher there being like, don't do that, do this, try this, oh, there you go, do more of that, they're gonna learn like 10x the speed of the person who's like reading the book, right? And that person reading the book is still gonna have to go through the experiential thing. And I love like how you kind of flip the equation on its head, because like, you're just like, I'm gonna go out and get the experience. And this is what some of the biggest, like, again, like, just tying it back to entrepreneurship, like, entrepreneurs are like, I'm just going to go figure it out. Like, I'm just going to go do and take a bunch of action, make a bunch of fucking mistakes. And like, they're learning, like, the most successful entrepreneurs are the ones who have like made the most mistakes in the most like fastest, most efficient process possible, and learned from it and iterated. And so I really love that. And I think like entrepreneurs almost kind of like put themselves through their own kind of like coyote teacher training, right? Like, they use the world as like Coyote, who's like kind of like leading them on, like, hey, Coyote's like, hey, there's an anomaly in the environment right here. I'm not going to tell you what it means. I'm not going to tell you what it's going to lead you to, but like, you might want to check that out, but you don't have to. Right. So, I really.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was just thinking, like, literally, my experience is like, I'm just now going to school. Well, I mean, I obviously wasn't made for school. It took me 10 years to get an associate's degree, chipping away at it. But at this point in my life, like, I found a college, well-accredited college that does competency-based training or learning, so I can go at my own speed. And I'm just about done the bachelor's in a year and 6 months, and all, it's like, boom. But I'm doing it at a stage in my life where it makes sense for me to do that. Like, I didn't know anything when I was a kid. If I was going to school for education and I went to school to learn how to educate, I mean, that just seems like so backwards to me. It's so funny at this point in my life, having done this training experience and all this experiential stuff, and then creating these programs and failing and succeeding. And now I'm going to school to kind of like learn how to frame what I've done and learn how to communicate that and share that. It's more as like, it's really interesting that that's just how it worked for me. It kind of went backwards, but.
Yeah. And I think one of the things I really love about this conversation, it gives permission to other people who that may be the better path for them, right?
Might be.
So I think, and this kind of ties back to your like left-right brain, like, stuff that you brought up, because like, a lot of people, like, I would say a lot of people function very well in like a left brain curriculum, right? But there is a huge, maybe it's not the majority, but there's still a ridiculous percentage of the population that does not work well for. They need to go through, the right brain side, which is more like experiential and comprehensive and holistic. And, I think that's what you did with yourself, is you went through kind of like a right brain path. And I want people listening to this to recognize either that may be the right path for you or your child.
It's an option.
Or a family member. And so instead of judging that person for not like fitting into the, the square, that they just can't fit into, like empowering them to, or empowering yourself to go another way that works just as well. It's just it's just a perception shift. It's it's the same path, but a different way.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, unfortunately, the only challenge maybe to add is our dominant culture doesn't reward it the same way. So it is a little tougher you have to find ways to make it, find compensation in it so that you're not just struggling your whole life and then get rewarded at the end. I think that's happening more and more. I think, as the educational system itself is showing cracks, especially COVID really helped with that, actually kind of seeing these weaknesses, it's pretty. So there's other ways, I actually had a kid go through one of my homeschool programs. He was an unschooled kid. When it came to hands-on, actually, he was just gifted in a lot of ways, but making like a basket or making anything that had to do with his hands or he was athletic and all this stuff, like cool kid. Didn't go to school at all, right? Other than homeschool or kind of unschooled. He just followed, his parents just supported him following his passion. He's currently getting his doctorate in environmental engineering, I think. And he's like 24, 25, just accelerated, freaking awesome. I mean, he had his own, he's also probably just exceptional, but yeah, there's lots of ways to do it. So I think that's a lovely story. And in hindsight, I kind of wish that had been how I'd done it when I was a kid, but hey,
well, you're kind of going that direction now. You're just you're just on a different timeline, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's the other thing is like, comparison is the thief of joy, right? So like everyone's journey takes place in its like own kind of like time zone, right?
Yeah.
Or time lapse. And, that's why like some people don't like really kind of come into their own until much later in life, and other people do it much younger, and then they go through some like big midlife crisis transformation. Like, so there's no wrong way to do life.
Yeah.
Kind of one other area that I wanted to delve into before we kind of like start to, wind this down is healing and kind of like health challenges, because pretty much everybody either will have one at some point in their life, unless they are like, put out of existence in an immediate fashion, or they know somebody. And so I just want to get some of your thoughts and reflections on healing and like physical health challenges.
Yeah, man, so important. So I think probably just the easiest way to start there is just to kind of share a little bit of my story, which is, as you said, when you first met me, I was probably, 21 or so. And, I was into bodybuilding. I was very much in that Tarzan identity, and, that was I still deeply identify with that, even though I don't have the hair and don't have the stuff. I still feel that spirit though, and it does guide me. But I had, so around 35, 37, I had a challenge with, I got somewhere between 25 and probably 35 in that 10-year span. I had been exposed to ticks in the Pine Barrens of New Jersey, training with Tom Brown, and contracted Lyme's disease and got a pretty nasty chronic infection. So ironically, I was so healthy because I had pursued health my whole life and was super fit and all that stuff. My body was so strong, actually, that by the time the disease got a good, hold in my body, and I started feeling the symptoms, I was actually pretty severe because my immune system was so strong and I was really, really healthy. So it had to get really bad before I started noticing it. I never had like the bullseye rash or any of that. So I didn't know when I got it, but I essentially assumed, because I know I've had tick bites, that it was in that 10-year period. And yeah, it shut me down, man. I went from being a CrossFit coach to training people and not being able to perform many movements myself, to finally just being like, I'm actually starting to kind of resent people that are being able to do this because I can't move and I'm being frustrated. So I just had to kind of check out, and I shifted my game to, it was actually thankfully also a real powerful wake up call, because it brought me to more holistic fitness and more functional fitness, I would say. Even though CrossFit's apparently pretty functional, it's also got some dysfunctions, I think. But so I had to change my game big time and started really getting into very, it's like had to adapt and do what I could. And that was tough. That was a really tough journey from being a very capable, athletic, strong, robust person to being kind of feeling vulnerable, having injuries, having no energy, you know, even having it affect my mood and my awareness and my deeper self. It's a very strange illness. So anyway, that was my challenge, as you said. Most people have to. I mean, I had a torn ACL, some other knee injury stuff that had slowed me down, but it was different than this systemic, chronic thing that was just grinding me out of existence. I was like, oh crap. So yeah, especially in a life where I'm a trainer, I'm teaching this embodied living, and kind of had this sense that I had to kind of exhibit it in order to teach it. I really felt out of integrity if I couldn't, but I'm like, well, how does that make room for people that are suffering? Because where do you follow your heart and, have some challenging experience? So it took me, I had a lot of grief around it, and I think I still do. I still have to deal with that, but it took me probably 10, 15 years to really, well, first of all, it took me about 7 years to just get out of kind of that critical stage of Lyme's. So I was on antibiotics for 4 years straight, like a cocktail of antibiotics. I was on all this healing protocols. Finally got my system back to where it was, stabilized, but I certainly wasn't able to perform at the same level. And meanwhile, I'd also hit about 45. So things changed naturally anyway. So yeah, it just kind of left me on the other end of it in a very different place. And since then, I'm 49 now. So it's been a few years that I'm kind of readapting, re-identifying, because so much of my identify was tied up in movement and being able to physically push myself to my limits and all that stuff, which I love. But, it's like, what am I going to do? Just drop my vision? Can I just give up? No. So I had to kind of reinvent or rediscover, I guess, or refine perhaps what really is the most important and meaningful aspects of this work, and kind of face a lot of the challenges of, can I still do what I feel called to do and be vulnerable, like reveal, like, yeah, if you can't be inspired by my movement, maybe we can inspire you in another way, because I can't do it all anymore. So at least in the same way. So I think part of that's just a growing up process, because inevitably at some age, I won't be able to do it in the same way. That's just kind of the laws of entropy. But I still hope to get back to another level of fitness beyond where I am now. But anyway, that's kind of a backstory. Those are the challenges I'm facing, and maybe we could refine the question from there.
Hey there, just a few words about the incredible show sponsors for today's episode, and then we'll dig right back in. Today's show is brought to you by Fit Rich Vegan. If you're ready to get in the best shape of your life, double your income, and 10x your savings and investments, then this is the coaching program for you. But wait a minute, Dragon. Isn't this your coaching program? Heck yeah, it is. I spent the last 8 years mastering my fitness and my finances, and I've built an incredible coaching program with an incredible team to help you get the body of your dreams and finally achieve that level of financial success that you've been seeking. So if you want to find out if you're a good fit for the program, go to fitrichvegan.com and book your free consultation today. Or you can just DM me on Instagram with the words FitRichVegan, and we can chat about if it's going to be a good fit for you. I'm committed to empowering people to actually achieve their fitness and financial goals. I spent the last 20 years trying to figure this out on my own. And what I realized is the key to doing it is not doing it alone. You have to have coaches, you have to have mentors, and you have to be a part of masterminds. And that's exactly what Fit Rich Vegan has. It has coaches, mentors, and it is a mastermind. So again, if you're ready to book your free consultation today, go to fitrichvegan.com or drop me a DM on Instagram. Yeah, so the reason this is on my mind a lot is twofold. One, like I turned 40. So like I'm not 25 and like invincible anymore, right? So like I'm just having to be infinitely more compassionate with myself and my own kind of physical capacities, which has been like a great teacher around compassion. Because like, you know, when I was younger, like it didn't matter. I would work out when I was sick. I'd be like, sweet, let's take some Dayquil and go. Like, fuck it. Like, I don't care. Like, I'll show this sickness. And you know what I mean? It's like, and I still struggle with pushing myself too hard to the point of like, you know, burnout or breakdown. And one of, I know kind of my journeys is bringing more balance into my life. And along with balance comes compassion, right? For oneself and for others. And also with age, we start to have to kind of like face the reality that like, you know, it's not like a perpetual, you know, climb to the top of the mountain. You know, the mountaintop doesn't just keep growing. Eventually you have to come down the other side of the mountain. And, you know, I don't necessarily think I'm at that peak yet, but like, it's almost like now I'm starting to see like, crap, you know, there is another side that I'm going to have to prepare for. And that's why, like, though this conversation, you know, is challenging for anyone, myself and you included, or anyone listening, I think it's a necessary conversation because in one way, shape, or form, we're all going to face this in areas of our life, right? Whether it's the decline of our career and the transition into another career and what that means, whether it's the decline of our bodies and the transition into different ways of moving and expressing physically in this world. And so, you know, one of the things I really work towards is, and I'm still learning this, so I'm like very much a student, not the teacher, but like our injuries, our illnesses can potentially be our best teachers or one of our best teachers if we allow them to be, if we empower them to be. So I'm just kind of curious if you can kind of frame it for us, like how can you utilize a health challenge as a teacher, you know, as a catalyst for transformation in one's life?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think similar to the idea of fasting, I mean, the difference between fasting and starving is basically an intention. You know, fasting can be miraculously healing and starving can be really painful, you know? So I think if we bring a similar mindset to healing, you can just, you know, hate your disease. You can be disappointed with yourself. You can give up on your life. Or like you said, you could embrace it as a teacher. And I think that's, I mean, you have a choice, but that's to me the obvious better choice. But learning how to do that, I think, is a process. And I think one thing that's really important is to learn how to process your grief around it, because there will be grief. Grief shows up anytime we have loss, you know, and if you have a loss of function or a loss of identity around, you know, if your identity is wrapped up in your physical capacity, you're going to experience some grief around that. So, you know, we all experience that differently. I think that's something to look into, though, is what's your relationship to grief. I think looking at identity, how much of your identity do you connect to your, well, in this topic, your physical attributes or your physical performance? I mean, is it significant? You know, is it like, you know, we all have a different relationship there. I know some people, it's barely a thing. They're like, yeah, I don't even know I have a body. I'm like, wow, that's really interesting. For me, it was really significant. You know, it was like, I realized that I had built a lot of when I was younger, when I got into lifting and stuff, I'd built a lot of it around kind of a negative self-worth, you know, or a negative self-esteem in my younger years, just because I was insecure, you know. And when you're literally bodybuilding, you're building your body, you're sculpting your tissue around that kind of intention, that has to be healed at some point, you know. So I've had a lot of healing around that as well. So I think that's useful just before you have a crisis. But so getting clear on why you're doing what you're doing, and is it how much of your identity is involved in that, and maybe before you face your challenges, you can help yourself by expanding your identity, expanding your sense of self, so that you're not, if you lose some aspect of function, you don't just feel like you've lost yourself. So I think that's really big. Learning some of the wise laws. I mean, what you're saying is really wise. I think, like, noticing, okay, I'm 40. I can see that the path isn't this infinite progress. How do I adjust from here? Like, where are the landmarks I need to be paying attention to hormonally or physically, or developmentally, stage of life, that kind of I can adjust with and adapt with? How can I move gracefully, basically, through those phases? And I think that's the dream right there, is can you move gracefully through these changes and accept that there are different seasons to life, and appropriately match those seasons without having huge disruptions, So that's one of the things I coach in, because I think it's so important, is really, like, basically it comes down to doing what you can with what you have. And if you can do that at every stage, and when you're young, it looks like being invincible and doing crazy stuff, like, training when you're sick, because you can, or you think you can. You do that too much, by the way, you will pay for it later, I think, because you do burn out in some ways. So it's doing everything in some sense of moderation, which was hard for me in the younger years to understand that. But finding the more efficient modes later on. Actually, another one is kind of the Tim Ferriss minimal optimal, finding that zone of play or of training, I think, is really, really powerful.
Yeah, I'm laughing because, like, that's what I'm like. I can't do like an 11 out of 10 exertion on every single exercise anymore. If I do that, I'm destroyed the next day. Now I have to play this game with myself where it's like I can maybe do like a 10 out of 10 exertion on the first like 1 to 3 exercises, but like if I do that for much more than 50% of the workout, I'm going to be destroyed the next day. And so it's like having to like have more grace with my own training is like, okay, cool. Do you want to work out tomorrow?
Yeah.
All right. Well, you got to hold back a little bit. You need to moderate yourself today if you want to work out tomorrow. And if you're okay not working out for a day, sure, go ahead.
Yeah.
Like, train your face off.
Right.
You can pick it back up in 2 days. So I think the seasons is another good one, right? And both the seasons and the doing it gracefully, funny enough, tracks back to tracking, right? If you're tracking kind of your own life path and the season that you're in, you're able to gracefully move through it, right? But if you're oblivious or ignoring the tracks, then you're going to run into a lot of frustration and disappointment, right?
Yep. There's the other thing too with what you're saying is intensity is relative. Like, if you're training, if I'm training a new to exercise female in her 60s, I'm going to certainly approach that differently than my nephew who just turned 18, training that kid.
Yeah.
So, but the interesting thing is both of them will have the perceived experience of difficulty that's the same experience, hard is hard. Doesn't matter if it's one squat or if it's, jumping off of a roof or something. It's like limits subjectively feel the same. So intensity is just intensity. It could be sometimes it's trading intensity of exertion, like maybe endurance or power, to something like focus or perfect form. So often that's what I do. Instead of chasing the number or the rep, I'll chase the form, and that gives me another limit to push, but doesn't have the same potential damage to, say, joints if I'm struggling with the joint or something. So I can just be like, okay, perfect form, 5 reps. What does that look like? And it's hard. It's not going to have the same outcome as a I'm not going to get huge doing that stuff, but
Yeah.
you might have to change your goals, change your, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, literally what I'm now optimizing for, because movement brings me so much joy, I'm having to hold back a lot more because I want to move every day.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I have to have that like a wisdom of being in touch with where my body is at in any given training session at any point in that training session, if I want to be able to do it again or do another training session the next day. And if I'm like mentally somewhere else and just like pushing myself as hard as possible, then like I won't be able to, then I have to deal with the challenge of like, for me, I'm one of those people when I don't move in a given day, like it mentally, emotionally is very challenging for me. Right. Yep. And then, the other part of that is like, okay, when I do get to those days, how are the ways that I can move, but like not like go lift weights, right? Like what are different ways of movement? So I'm in this huge exploration phase right now of like, there's so many ways to move, right? And so many different tools to move with, right? Like all like one that is super recent for me is I just got into batons, which is like very much a weapon, right?
Yeah.
But like if you hold like a 5-pound weighted baton, it is radically different than a 10-pound, which is radically different than a 20-pound. Like, and, you could even go through like a recovery movement, pattern with that 5 or 10-pound baton that would help, recover you for your next training session, which, would actually speed up the recovery. But if I tried to pick up that 20-pound baton or heavier and tried to go through it on a day when I needed a recovery workout, like then I'm choosing the wrong tool for the wrong, micro season that I was in that particular day.
Right.
And it's that like body wisdom that I'm like trying to tap into.
Dude, that's the key right there. You said it. Yep. On all levels. That's for me, that's recovery, nutrition, movement, body wisdom.
I got to share one more. So this never used to be an issue for me up until very recently. I used to be able to crush a giant fucking dinner, huge, like 1,000, 1,500 plus calories. Like, because oftentimes I'll fast until, and have 1 or 2 meals a day.
Yeah.
And go to sleep immediately.
I remember you telling me that. Yeah.
Oh, dude, if I do that, it fucks my recovery up now. And so now, and I'm literally in the middle of it. So now I'm in this process of like figuring out how do I wait for ideally 2 hours before I go to bed. So I'm having to restructure my entire fucking day.
Yeah.
And like, cause I'm like, usually I eat and I just want to go to sleep. But like, I know if I go to sleep, I'm going to feel super like just fatigued the next day.
Wow.
And so now it's like, I'm literally in the middle of it right now. And for years, people are like, that's not good for your health. And I'm like, whatever, like my digestive system isn't crazy, like strong. Yeah. So now all that's fucking changing. So that's like one of my healing journeys that I'm in the middle of right now.
Yeah, man. It's, well, I'm kind of, don't take this wrong, I'm kind of glad to hear that because I was like, how are you doing that?
Yeah.
I used to do that. But yeah, no, man, it's all about digestion at this point. It's like, I got way more into Qigong and things that are supporting my organ systems. Mm-hmm. Because if your organ systems are happy, then your musculature is happy. But if it's not, you're going to have the aches and pains, you're going to have the fatigue, you're going to have, your muscles are slaves to the organs. So it's like, they have to be prioritized. Yeah.
I like that.
They basically go ahead.
No, it's just such a great framing.
Your
muscles are a slave to the organ system. And when you're young, you can kind of like circumvent that, but it will fucking catch up.
It totally will.
Right?
It totally will.
Because that's what you were saying about me, like taking, Dayquil and go working out.
Yeah.
I'm fucking with my organs, and eventually it's going to come back knocking and be like, hey, you got to pay for that now.
Yep.
Right? And same thing with, eating, a ton of food right before sleep.
Any of the stressful activities, any of that distress we put on our bodies at some point, if it becomes a pattern, especially, I think that we pay for those. I think we can have some, when we're younger, some one-off stuff. We just have credit for that. We just have it. There's a margin, but that margin gets smaller and smaller as you get older. And then it's like, okay, this is calculated game. How do I do this? And I prioritize, the organ system, nervous system. And then everything seems to flow if those things are happy,
Yeah.
That's something I learned with my education in inflammation, which is primarily what Lyme's taught me. I'm super aware of inflammation. I can sense it at very minuscule levels systemically and just be like, okay, that's if I don't floss my teeth one night or something, I'll notice a change in inflammation. It's like,
Wow.
it's a thing.
Yeah. And, this kind of makes me think about the nervous system. So like kind of one of the big journeys I've been on, I don't know, the last 8 years is meditation, right? Is like, what are the tools that I can implement to, maintain the fitness of my nervous system?
Yeah.
In this crazy world that we live in. And I live in one of the craziest parts being in like Silicon Valley, right? And so I think that's another big one. And you mentioned Qigong, which I think is really cool because it's a combination of physical movement plus nervous system fitness.
It's no wonder it's been around for thousands of years. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
Those systems are so brilliant and integrated.
Yes, that's, I think, like I mentioned, I'm moving towards balance. I think what I'm moving towards is integrative balance, right? Of all the different disciplines and being fit, not just physically with my musculature,
right?
But, with my nervous system and my psyche and my emotions. And I think that's what we're all seeking, right? It's just like, are we going to be conscious of that journey, or are we gonna be a victim of that journey?
Right. Yeah.
Well, are there any other kind of topics or areas that you want to discuss before we land this plane?
There are. I mean, all kinds are coming up. I am feeling like I need to get going, but maybe, I mean, if you're down, I'd love to carry on with another segment, another chapter.
100%.
Yeah.
You don't think this will be the only time
Right
you'll be on my podcast, brother?
Right on.
So I guess with that, is there any last words of wisdom or, requests that you want to make to the audience or anything else you'd, want to share?
Maybe I just threw out there, there's a slogan that I've kind of adopted with my work, and it's on my website. It's on kind of it's one of the takeaways that people end up with when they move on or do a class or something. And basically it's, you matter, keep going. It's kind of these two phrases. And I got them through my training, and kind of a bunch of stuff kind of coalesced around those two ideas. And I guess to put it briefly, it's hard for people to get how much they matter. And I think that's one of the main programs in our training, Tribal Edge, is called The Journey. And it's a year-long, basically, apprenticeship into the Primal Arts. And one of the big takeaways by the end is that people start to really, because it's done in a community format and as a group, really get a sense of, I guess I do matter. You can't think that something's going to, if you're part of a group or something, you're part of a class, or you're part of a activity, and you just don't show up for some reason, that whole event changes. Like, something different happens. If you were there, it would be a whole nother experience. And when you're not there, it's a whole nother experience. Doesn't mean it's better or worse, by the way. It just means you matter. It means like you have an impact. So I hope people just remember that it's not even necessarily what you're doing. It's just who you're being, and that is significant. And that I think it ties in with the vision quest as well, that your vision matters. Like we need that as human beings. There's a space, in the mystery or in creation that is the shape of you, and we need that. So we need that. We need your presence. We need you in the relational way as well. So we need that connection. And the other part is keep going, which is basically, it doesn't mean win. It doesn't mean you're not doing good enough. It just means literally just take the next step. Like, that's enough. Don't worry about down the road. That will reveal itself if you do keep going. If you want to master something, if you want to be excellent at something, or you just want to complete this journey as a human, just please keep going. do what you can and keep doing that and just keep choosing. So I think I'll leave it with that.
Awesome. Well, if they want to take the next step with you or Tribal Edge, where's the best place for people to connect with you?
Yeah, the website, tribaledge.life, has a lot of information. Some people are overwhelmed by it. I mean, it was built by me. It's not perfect. So my email, my contact info is on there, though. Welcome to contact me. Love to. I do like a half an hour free consultation with any questions and that kind of stuff. That might be the best place. So
awesome. Well, Ben, thank you so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate you. We'll definitely have you back in the future.
Thanks, brother. Really appreciate you. Keep on alchemizing life out there.
Absolutely, brother.
All right. Take care.
Thanks for tuning in. And remember, literally everything can be used as an opportunity to learn, to heal, to grow, and to transform. So whatever is going on in your life, choose to consciously and proactively harness that energy and use it to alchemize your life to the next level. If you enjoyed the show, please share it with a friend or on your favorite social media and leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. As always, you can find me at Justin David Carl on Instagram and all the socials, as well as at alchemizelife.com on the web. Until the next time, sending you lots of energy and plenty of dragon magic.